Welcome to our election special podcast where we've been interviewing some great independent candidates challenging the mainstream political parties and in fact giving them a run for their money and sleepless nights to many of the incumbent candidates sitting there with large or small majorities, because for the first time ever this is one of the most interesting elections in modern history in the UK because of the sheer amount of independent candidates challenging the mainstream parties. And today I have a great honor in hosting Dr. Amar Waraich, who is a neurology doctor and a Harvard graduate. We welcome him to our studio. How are you doing? And thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Fantastic. And we also have another special guest, Dr. Nasir Hussain, who's a gastroenterology specialist, and he joins us on this special election podcast as well. Jazakallah for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. And I'm looking forward to this because I'm in the constituency that Dr. Ammar is running in.
Okay.
So it'd be really good for me to learn more and help me make my decision.
Okay, so are you sitting on the fence?
I'm not sitting on the fence, but I've got Preet Gill there, who I cannot in good conscience vote for again. But what are my alternatives? Will they make a difference? And I'm hoping that's what we get to find out today.
Let's hear from Dr. Amar Waraich. Who is Dr. Amar Waraich?
Well, I'm just a local doctor, frankly, but not a seasoned political operator, not a career politician, never done politics before. I studied medicine and business management at Imperial College London. I graduated and I just worked in medicine for about 5 years. At that point, I took a career break to go into academia. So I taught at the University of Birmingham for 2 years at the medical school. And from there, as you mentioned, I transitioned as a Fulbright scholar to Harvard University to pursue a degree in public policy, which is essentially political science and economics. I got to learn political science and microeconomics, economic philosophy and things like that from some of the world's leading scholars. And that was all at Harvard University.
So you've studied politics at theoretical level.
Yes.
Now it's time to experience it at a practical level.
So look, I finished my degree at Harvard, then I was employed as a fellow there, and my special area of interest was comparative politics and Middle Eastern politics. So I've been a theoretician, an academic, not a practitioner of politics at all. And then what happened was the interesting story. I was living in the USA, working in the USA. I came to visit my family for 5 days in March of 2020, I think. Yeah, 2020. This is during COVID times. I got here. On day 2, President Trump announced that the borders are closed to anyone who doesn't have an American passport or a green card. I had neither. So I was locked out. I'm a COVID refugee back to the UK.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So I had a house and life in America, in Boston, and I was stranded here. I started doing my job remotely to America, and eventually time went on and my visa expired, and therefore I couldn't go back to the country. So my friends actually in the States packed up all my belongings into boxes and shipped it across to me. So that's the interesting story. And the way I ended up back in the NHS is actually because I had taken that academic break. It's during COVID time. So while I was here, the Department for Health put out a call to say if any recently deregistered doctors want to come back into the service for COVID reasons, you're welcome to. So that's when I really entered the fray, and I restarted my medical work during COVID times, and it was a very, very traumatic time for me. And actually that time was the start, I would say, of my politicization, if I can put it that way, because before I was a student of politics and political science at a theoretical level. But when kind of the rubber hit the road with COVID, and I saw what were the policy failures of the government right in front of me, and how
Give us an example. What are you referring to?
Well, I'll give you a great example. So when one of the times I was there was during the second wave. The end of the first wave. Okay, so I saw the end of the first wave, and all of our wards became from red wards to green wards, which basically means COVID-free wards, and we were doing very well. Until suddenly the government announced the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. Yeah. And literally 2 weeks after that, which is the incubation period of the COVID virus, our wards saw a huge influx of yes. And the thing is, I've kind of locked that period of my life away because it's so traumatic to think about sometimes. But what that meant is the ward, from being completely COVID free, became a full of COVID ward. And every day we were having a couple of deaths of people, people who were like 37, 43, young people, but of course also the elderly. And what I saw there was a complete and utter political and policy failure.
And that's just one side of things. We're forgetting that during all of this happening, the party scandals that were happening,
the PPE scandals,
the Matt Hancock's scandal, the Boris Johnson parties, and we also had at the same time our sovereign, the Queen, following the rules herself. And we've got, like Dr Amar said, wards and people suffering, whilst our government.
So Nasir, you mentioned the issue with PPE.
Yeah.
When I was working, actually, at that time, at the early stage of the virus, PPE was not regularly available. And actually, I think whether it was a government policy or a local hospital policy, we were just given basic surgical masks to wear. Now, I've trained in infectious diseases and worked in ID before, and I knew that this wasn't adequate for a respiratory-borne virus. I asked for a high-grade mask for myself, but I was told the policy is no for that. So I continued working in my normal, mask, and, despite trying the hardest, this is before the vaccine came out, by the way. I tried my hardest not to get the virus. I got the virus, and as I said, because I was recently back from America, I was at that time still living with my parents. So unknown to me, I took the virus back. I gave it to everybody in my family.
Wow.
And my dad, actually, he himself is a doctor at a local hospital. He nearly went to ICU. His life was pretty much, I actually feared for his life.
So now I understand why you said it was a traumatic time for you.
It was very traumatic. It was like the most, to me personally, it's actually a parallel to the trauma I'm experiencing during the Gaza episode that's happening now, the genocide in Gaza. That kind of trauma is the trauma I also felt when my dad nearly went to, intensive care with really bad lung disease because of policy failures.
So this is a huge emotional decision for you to enter into politics because of the Gaza issue. So what would you say to the people who are saying that, who would say to a lot of the independent candidates that you're jumping on the bandwagon, you're basically, cashing in on people's emotions, high emotions in this Gaza situation, and secondly, you're a one-trick pony. Nasir, would you agree with?
So for me, the Gaza situation is one of my key motivating factors to determine who I'm going to vote for.
So it's a hugely emotive subject for you as well.
Exactly. And but for me, like you said, is somebody just running because of that policy? Because we can't just run on that. We've got so many failings in this country. So it'd be nice to know what Dr. Ammar's got planned.
Yeah. Let's ask Dr. Amar.
Look, Gaza is the most horrific, the genocide in Gaza is the most horrific and criminal act perpetrated by the Western political establishment that in my lifetime I can think of, to be honest. Obviously Iraq War comes to mind, and I used to have that.
Why is this more different to the Iraq War? Again, without digressing. I've tried to answer that in my own mind. I think it's more to do with social media now. And maybe the same atrocity, the same suffering, not maybe, definitely was happening then, but we weren't able to see it firsthand because our perception was filtered through the mainstream media at the time, which now with social media, all the veils have been lifted.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I think the Iraq War, still though, there was some code of conduct determining the military operations. In this war, it's extremely evident and clear that war crimes are being perpetrated freely on a daily basis and by everyone in the Israeli military, from the top to the bottom. It's well documented. The international bodies, the ICJ, the ICC have testified at this, against the Israeli military on this, and the Israeli state on this. And then we've got, as you said, social media evidence. Israeli soldiers themselves going into homes of poor Palestinians who've been displaced and maybe died, who knows. And they're there taking baseball bats, breaking furniture, wearing their lingerie, rummaging through their personal possessions. And this is freely available on social media, yet our leaders can't even say anything about this. Not only that, we've got reports from medics who've volunteered in Gaza of children who are 5 years old having a sniper shot to the head and dying in their parents' arms. We've got video evidence, we've got photographic evidence of women and children being shot dead outside hospitals when they were coming to seek medical care. This did not, in my short life, I haven't seen this happen anywhere. Even in completely, completely.
I think many people haven't. Many people haven't.
Yeah.
I mean, is this the same emotive sort of energy that you're seeing on the doorstep when you're knocking the doors in Edgeborough, that the people are feeling this issue is very important for them as well, or is there other things that which they're concerned about?
Look, on a day-to-day basis, there are many issues affecting the residents of Edgbaston. This is certainly one. People put this as solely a Muslim issue. I'm here to tell you it's not. Across the board, people are very emotionally charged by this issue, and really the limp opposition provided both by our government and the Labour opposition, people are very, very animated and angry at that. So we're getting a lot of support from that front, but it's beyond that. After doing canvassing on the doorsteps in Edgbaston, I've really been let into people's lives in a way that I hadn't before. And I've got to see, actually, it's a very diverse constituency. We've got areas where some of the poorest in Birmingham live, and they have their own...
Even in your ward?
Yes, no, not ward, but constituency. There's certain wards that are very, very deprived, and they are having their own significant social and economic problems. And then there's actually largely middle class and wealthier constituencies that also have their own problems. So it's a...
So what are the problems that the wealthy people are facing in your constituency?
Dr. just before we move on, I wanted to make it clear. So when it comes to the Palestine-Gaza issue, do you have a very clear policy? Because I've seen people say one thing, and then when it came to the ceasefire vote, I believe our very own current incumbent, as well as some other Labour MPs in Birmingham, abstained for a vote. If you are a voice for peace...
Yeah, so why aren't you voting for a ceasefire?
Exactly, it shouldn't be a difficult choice. And you never know what a person will do when they come in. So if you were in that position, is it a clear-cut issue for you? And what is making these other people, in two minds? What is it that's... You hear about lobbies. Money, unfortunately, makes a difference. Is that something that you could be influenced by or affected? Can I believe that this is a clear-cut issue for you with no compromise?
It's a clear-cut issue for me. I had no reason to enter the political fray. I'm serving the public through the NHS. I've got a career, I've got a family. My kids haven't seen me for weeks now. My family hasn't seen me for weeks. I had no need to do this. The only reason I'm doing that is for actually the community. Gaza is one issue the community feels very strongly about, but there's other issues as well, okay? But in terms of what our current existing MPs are doing, yes, they've not only failed to back a ceasefire, but it's the absolute silence. If you look, I really don't do personal attacks or personal politics, but if you look at, for example, the Twitter feed of the current incumbent in Edgbaston, all the way from the initial Hamas attacks, all the way to now, there's barely any mention. I think, in fact, there's no mention. I'll have to go back to double check. But I think there's no mention at all of the atrocities committed by Israel on, the Palestinian people. But now the election time is here, I find that constituents are telling me when I knock on their doors, look, I've been given this leaflet by the incumbent MP in Edgbaston saying that she supports ceasefire, and she's waiting to get into power, and if we're in power we'll do more to back Gaza, but while we're out of power we've got to play a careful political game. It's disgusting. Nonsense. Because look, a moral issue requires an urgent moral response. I've heard nothing from the Labour Party, whether that be on Twitter, like I've said, but look at the leader of the Labour Party, it's Keir Starmer. He is an international human rights lawyer who's presented cases to the International Court of Justice. If anybody knows international law, it's him. And
he's been very wishy-washy on this subject.
Wishy-washy? What have we heard him say on LBC? He said Israel has the right to restrict. No, he said the right to restrict power and water. And if anybody knows the law, he knows the law. What he said is very, very calculated, and I think he was making a calculated political gesture there. So any claim to a moral superiority is gone after that, to be honest.
Dr. Nasir, I was going to ask you, if Dr. Amar came knocking your door, what other questions as a constituent would you be asking him?
Well, I'll be honest, one of the first things that would strike me when you introduced yourself and when you did here is you're clearly an intelligent man. and you're clearly somebody that spent their life or their career caring for people. And they're two qualities you'd expect and want from your candidate. But I'd want to ask you, what does Edgbaston mean to you? I mean, you talked about going to the US and so on. Is Edgbaston somewhere that you hold close or dear to you? I mean, did you grow up here? Tell me what this area means to you.
Right, yeah. So thank you for that question, actually. Edgbaston, I came to the UK as an immigrant, and I spent 1 year in Haverfordwest, which is a small town in Wales. From there,
beautiful place.
Beautiful place. For me, as a new immigrant, it was a huge culture shock. Lovely people, absolutely lovely people. They really kind of took us to their hearts. Had a wonderful time there, but I was following my dad's footsteps wherever my dad's work took him. So my dad worked a year from there, and then he got employed here at what is currently City Hospital. Used to be called Dudley Road Hospital back in the day, I think. And we moved in to Rotten Park Road, which is at the very north end of our constituency. And I lived in Rotten Park Road, and I went to a local school there called Lordswood Boys School, and that was my first kind of introduction to the secondary school system. Obviously, at that time, I'm not sure about now, but at that time it was a bit of a challenging environment to be educated in. But that's how my kind of attachment to Edgbaston started. And now fast forward 20 odd years, I'm working as a neurology doctor at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, which is a local
also in your constituency.
It is. I've taught at the University of Birmingham's Medical School as one of their clinical lecturers. And otherwise, I actually play tennis in the constituency as well. So from all ends, from the north end to the south end, I've been in the constituency and I know it quite well. I'm there every day as part of work. I'm out and about. And the important thing actually with the hospital connection is that I get to see what the constituents around are actually facing. I get to see the effects of the cost of living crisis. I get to see the effect of failed COVID policies, right? I get to see
and failed NHS.
I was going to come to that. That's one of the biggest things for me, the failings of the NHS, right? It's a wonderful institution, the NHS. I mean, it's doing very important work, as Nasir will tell you. But I work in neurology. Some of my patients wait 2 to 3 years sometimes before they get to see me. For these specific patients, it can be quite a challenging time because they're living with their symptoms. But in my specialty, that can sometimes mean that they accrue disability, for example.
Or die in the interim.
Well, death. I mean,
not particularly in your department,
yeah,
but if overall NHS waiting list.
Yeah, if you could talk
about Nasir, would you agree?
Yeah, do you want to talk about any waiting times?
I mean, because I think the NHS, because Edgbaston really is a fantastic place. The University of Birmingham, Selly Oak, the park, the hospital. We're talking about a tertiary centre, specialist hospital. I mean, the building looks fantastic. But if you go inside that building, the morale within the NHS does not exist anymore.
Really?
It has been broken. Nobody is happy. People are worn out, overworked, overtired. And they went
Is that from the top to bottom?
From the top to the no one ever knows what's happening at the top and how they feel, because the chief exec's in a different world.
I mean, like senior doctors and registrars.
Yeah. From the clinicians, the patients that are those people that are patient facing. Morale is it deteriorated. COVID took a big hit, but a round of applause will only take you so far. And I'll tell you now, Brother Zafar, people are worn out. They're wanting to leave. Staff shortages are occurring, and that just puts more pressure on those. So if there's the biggest failing, I would say, is the NHS under this Tory 14-year government.
So is that one of your manifesto pledges to try and sort of do something about the NHS?
It's my number one manifesto pledge. Look, I've got a degree in public policy. I trained in health policy specifically. As I said, I've been politicized by watching the policy failures. Okay, let me give you some statistics. The NHS has got the lowest numbers of doctors and nurses amongst all OECD nations. It's got the lowest numbers of beds across all OECD nations. It's got the lowest numbers of scanners, okay, which is extremely important, especially in my specialty. It's got the highest occupancy rate, okay, and the budget shortfall is at least £60 billion, if not a lot more, actually.
Shortfall?
Since the 2008.
So now, annually?
Well, no, all in all.
Okay.
But the thing is, if you look at the recent analysis by the Nuffield Trust, and there was another analysis published today by the Health Foundation, they are criticizing the Labour and Conservative manifesto, saying that the spending commitments in those manifestos barely cover even the staff costs, let alone all of the extra staff that they're promising that they'll recruit. So it's a lie to say to the public that we are going to fix the NHS without investment. So actually, my number one commitment, my number one value is standing up for greater investment in our NHS, but also, as well as that, standing up for staff. You know, doctors are striking. I'm a junior doctor. My colleagues are striking. There's a strike happening at the end of this month, before the election. We're striking for our pay and our very poor working conditions. One of the pledges that I'm making is, one of the values I'm standing for is meeting those demands made by health workers and their unions, whether that be doctors, whether that be nursing colleagues, or whether that be other colleagues, and meeting those demands. And that's something I will advocate and fight for.
With all due respect, as a single independent candidate not attached to a mainstream politician, I don't know whether you get asked this question or not. How on earth are you going to make a difference as a single independent MP if elected?
That's a good question. Nasir, do you want to come in?
Well, that's the answer I'm looking for.
All right.
Now, I know that when I thought about my vote, one of the things, and I think, I imagine many feel this way, my choice is only really Labour or Conservative. If I don't vote for Labour, it means Conservatives are going to come in, and that's the last thing I want. So being drawn to an independent becomes more appealing, but I need that convincing.
Yeah. So you think that it could be a wasted vote?
Yeah. Am I going to do even more harm by taking a vote away from Labour, and that means Conservatives? Well, if I'm realistic, let's be honest, Conservatives haven't got a chance. The fact that we're seeing a rise.
Okay, the issue is both of these parties are very much the same. I quote what George Galloway has famously said, that both Labour and Conservatives are two cheeks belonging to the same ass, right? So whether you look, it's true. Keir Starmer, who's largely now slowly moving away from his ties with the trade unions and attracting big donors, even from various Zionist lobbies, his policies are going to be not much more different to what the Tories have been doing for the last 14 years. There really is going to be a very little difference. What do you think?
Well, yes, I agree with that.
But answer the question about the wasted vote.
I will do. So in terms of the two parties becoming the same, I was actually a Labour Party member.
Yeah.
And I was starting to get extremely disappointed in the direction that the party was taking. Obviously for me, in October, that LBC interview was the hammer blow that broke the camel's back, as it were. I couldn't stay in the party any longer after that. But before that, I was moving away from the party because I saw that it was becoming like a monoparty, a uniparty between the Tory and the Conservatives. So we're standing for values that we believe in, which is greater investment in the NHS, greater investment in our public service and in our education, an end to the cuts that are really damaging and affecting our society here in Birmingham, more for green politics and the green transition, which Labour has again moved away from, and of course peace and justice in Palestine. We're standing for those exact values. Now, in terms of the independent vote being wasted, what are your options? Your options are to vote Conservative, Lib Dems, Labour, the big parties, or someone like myself.
Do Lib Dems even still exist?
But or the Greens, right? You could put a vote anywhere you want to. Ultimately, you're going to be electing someone who's going to be, at best, a backbencher. Okay? How do backbenchers operate in a political system? Yes, they may belong to a party. Yes, they may lend their vote to kind of the prime minister, right, to allow them to become prime minister. But how do backbenchers operate? What do they do? Like, if you look around, look at Zara Sultana. Look at how she's been so effective in parliament while being a backbencher, right? You can speak out for issues, you can propose legislation, you can hold people to account, you can have a lot of influence. That's what I intend to do. But in terms of, being an independent, one positive I would say is I've got no ministerial jobs lined up for me. I've got no greasy career ladder to climb. I don't care for those things. I'm purely about representing.
So you'd be happy to stay as a backbencher all your life if you were elected?
I'd be thrilled to be a backbencher because that's how you can best serve the public, I think. Look, instead of being Parliament's representative to the public, I want to be the public's representative to Parliament. There's a big difference between the two, and the current party system gives us the former, not the latter. Yeah, but talking about the national picture, if you're worried about the Tories coming in, don't be. There's not an independent candidacy in every single constituency. All right, so if you've got a good independent, I'm saying to people on the doorstep, it's an option for you to vote. a different option for you to vote, to see a different kind of politics. Not every seat has that option. Nationally, I think we all know Labour is going to win. So in that context, what kind of challenge to the upcoming incumbent do you want to have? And that's what an independent candidacy allows you.
Dr. Nasir, what Dr. Amar said so far, has he convinced you to lend him your vote?
I'll tell you where it's left me. I need to go to the ballot box and I need to look at a name and I need to pick a name that best serves what I feel. And I can't spend my time thinking about, what will happen and if this vote will... I think doing that is probably going to do me more harm. What bothers me, people standing up for Palestine and being anti-genocide, to vote for a ceasefire and not abstain. And when I look at that list, I've got to say, Dr. Amar, you should get my tick.
Thank you.
The NHS, I've worked in it. I don't think it's right that in a Western developed country, patients are waiting 8 hours or more in A&E. That's just not right. You probably get seen quicker in Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. It's just not on.
Yeah, that's probably because it's more private then. So is that where we are steering towards?
Well, my patients, they can't wait. They go private. So you talked about the...
issues of the wealthy.
Yeah, issues of the wealthy, right? It's not an issue of the wealthy. Actually, what we're seeing is like lower middle class people paying out of pocket to send their kids to private school, okay? And to send their kids, to take themselves to private healthcare, all because of the way our system is set up. So the NHS waiting list...
NHS I can understand.
Yeah.
You're in a waiting list for an operation.
Yeah.
You're forced to go private.
Yeah.
But surely we're not forced to send our kids to private school. That's a luxury. Either you can afford or you can't afford. So it's not really a problem, is it?
So I agree with that. And I thought exactly as you said. That's what I thought as well. It's the wealthy sending their kids to private school, the middle classes. What actually on the doorstep I've learned is that the local schools, unfortunately, are failing quite significantly. And so people are paying above what they can afford to send their kids to private school in the hope of getting...
So they're financially stretching themselves.
They really, really are. And then this Labour policy of introducing a 20% VAT on education...
It's going to increase the fees, isn't it?
It's going to increase the fees to a point where these people can't afford it. And let me tell you about a specific subset of our constituents, actually. These are people with children who have special educational needs.
The ones who are sending them private?
That's one of the key cohorts, yeah, because the special educational need provision in our state schools has been reduced to such a shocking state that people who have special educational need children are not getting what they need from the state education system. So they are especially stretching themselves to send their kids to private schools because the provision is so poor. And these parents particularly are really stretching themselves, and we will be hit the hardest. And it's extremely unfair, extremely unfair. I mean, even if they didn't exist, if you look at education, what is education? It's a merit good. It's something that's beneficial to everybody. I don't think putting a 20% VAT on that is a good way to go about raising money when you've got the options for a wealth tax, when you've got an option for a capital gains tax, when you've got the option for true redistributive policies like taxing multinationals, for example, Google, Amazon, etc. What tax do they pay? The Labour Party shied away from all of these, and what they're doing instead is they're punishing parents that are stretching themselves to educate their children.
Dr. Amar, another very emotive subject, which may be quite more relevant in your constituency because you're not serving a largely Muslim constituency as such, is the issue of immigration, especially illegal immigration. Is that something that comes up for discussion on the doorstep?
Yeah, it does. Look, illegal immigration is a concern for the constituents across the board. And the reason they're concerned about that is because it's a lack of control. People who are coming to this country don't go through legal and correct processes. That's their concern. Okay, but I've met people across the constituency who are also saying we've got to stop this this habit of making refugees and immigrants into scapegoats. So one of the key policies I'm standing for is decency and dignity for all, whether that be immigrants, refugees, disabled people, or anybody else in the constituency or community. Everybody should feel respected and welcomed. In terms of the specific policy points, look, we've got to scrap costly, expensive and useless projects like the Baby Stockholm boat and the barge. We've got to scrap the Rwanda policy, which we all know is completely not providing any return on investment.
Gimmick that.
And we need to invest instead in providing safe routes and faster processing of claims. Obviously, this is a public policy challenge that the country faces, and that's my solution to it.
I just want to add on that, because I've spoken to people who feel strongly about immigration. Anti-immigration. But when you really talk to them, what they haven't got an issue with immigrants. These aren't people that just hate people from other countries.
Yeah.
They're worried about the impact. And the reason for it, Brother Zafar, is they feel the reason the NHS is falling apart is because there's too much immigration.
But that's not the case, really.
Exactly. They believe the schools are failing and overcrowded because, I'm telling you now, one of the biggest tricks you can play is to stop people looking at you as a person that's causing issues. The government, with their underfunding, it's them that have left the school and the NHS in this state. But the biggest trick you can play is make them look elsewhere. There needs to be a sensible immigration policy.
I've had these discussions myself with people where there's a discussion about the people in the rubber dinghy boats being the source of all our problems in the UK. UK is broken because of this. This is not broken because of that. It's broken because of the career politician. Sorry, I know you're not a career politician.
Not yet, anyway.
Not yet. You haven't seen that greasy pole yet that he has to climb up. Career politicians, the venture capitalists, you've got the arms manufacturers, you've got the banks. There's so many factors at play which have ruined the infrastructure and the fabric of this country that blaming it on just a few thousand people coming on rubber dinghy boats, it's a complete and total propaganda.
So proper investment in your NHS, proper investment in your schools. These people that feel or have had the finger point immigration, they won't be voting reform because they won't be worried about the services. But if you keep those services poor, people look for someone to blame. And I liked I've got to say, I really did like your answer on that, Dr. Amar. And when that's going through my head at the ballot box, and I've got a name to choose, like I've said with the Palestine situation, I didn't finish it on the NHS one, but with the NHS it's clear. People
vested interest.
Yeah, well, people shouldn't be, but from a patient perspective, you shouldn't wait 8 hours in A&E. You shouldn't wait
8 hours, 16 hours, my friend. Yeah.
You shouldn't wait 2 hours to 2 weeks to see your GP. And when I look at those names, and from what Dr. Amar said, he'd get my tick. That answer you gave, where you didn't do the typical easy thing and just point a finger and blame, but took some accountability of what you're going to work on, you'd get my tick. So I've got to say you've made my decision a lot easier.
MashaAllah. Dr. Amar, I know it's a good couple of weeks left yet, or just a little over, to the actual D-Day of elections to see what happens, whether the earthquake in Edgbaston occurs and unseats the incumbent. That's yet to be seen, but we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
And any final thoughts from yourself?
Look, people say to me on the doorstep, you know what, I'm not political. But I say to them back, look, everything in life is political, right?
Very true.
The waiting lists in your GP surgery, the schools that your kids go to, the poverty and inequality you suffer from, the rubbish on your streets, the crime on your streets, the problems that the community is suffering from in terms of drugs and other addictions. This is all political. We've got the option on Thursday, the 4th of July, to vote for change. For the first time in this country's history, there's a strong independent movement offering a different kind of politics. All right? So my plea is to people, please, 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 go out and vote on Thursday, the 4th of July. Vote as you want to, But just think about what I've said. Just think about the value proposition of the independent and how we can challenge the corrupt political establishment, and give us your vote and vote for change.
And just a final thing, Dr. Amar, obviously we could talk all day, but if people that don't get a chance to speak to you or see you, do you have a website or anything that we can direct them to?
So for my candidacy, my campaign is called Vote Ammar for Dr. Amar for Edgbaston. Vote Dr. Amar for Edgbaston. You can check out everything about our campaign on www.ammar.vote. So that's ammar.vote. Okay,
That's
everything's
great.
there.
We shall finish on that point. And as viewers listening to this podcast will knows that this is one of the most interesting elections in modern day era in the UK because of the huge independent movement which is now gaining momentum and challenging the mainstream politics. The landscape of this UK political scene is surely to be changing very rapidly. Yes, there's predictions of a Labour majority, but yes, there's also some great pockets of resistance emerging in the country through this independent movement. We shall wait and see what happens on the 4th of July. Until then, we'll see you again.